Welcome to this episode of the Warpath Podcast, where we endeavor to tell the stories of Harlandale High School alums whose journeys have been amazing, if not unique. Today, our guest is Martin Gomez, a member of the Harlandale High School class of 1982, and his story is both amazing and unique, universally and certainly among Harlandale High School alums. I would like to start, I'd like to introduce Martin to our audience with a few bullet points here. He's done a lot of just incredibly amazing things. He started off as a young man, a designer for Dillard's department store, broke new ground there. There wasn't a designer at Dillard's department store when he took on that job, and he's going to tell us that story. He is Vice President, this is a mouthful, Vice President of Global Sourcing, Product Development, Global Compliance, Fabric R&D, and Color. It is a worldwide, renowned for worldwide fashion. And when I have conversations with Martin, I'm never sure if he's in Thailand or Hong Kong or Paris. And when we say global, it's not an exaggeration to say that his impact on global fashion is worldwide. Beyond that, I guess I should, before I get to too many bullets, his journey and Selena's journeys, Selena Quintanilla, his journey and Selena's journey converged at a point in their lives, and together they collaborated to create an iconic brand. Of course, Selena is known for her music, of course, but her legacy is twofold: the music and fashion. And Martin Gomez and Selena worked together for a time to create that brand, and the work, the legacy lives through our time and will certainly live for decades. That work is currently on exhibit at Texas State University at the Whitliff Collections, and it will be on exhibit till January of 2026. The title of the exhibit is The Selena Effect, so that you have an idea of what they have on exhibit. There's some of the work that they did together, and it's worth your time. San Marcos is not that far away. You've got to January 26th to enjoy that exhibit. His story has been told on Texas Monthly and Texas Public Radio, on Hulu, CNN, local stations, and we're honored that Martin is going to allow us to share his story with you here on our channel. Before we get too far, of course, as you're telling your story, you're also writing your memoir. So you're about set to publish a memoir. And we certainly want to hear about all of those bullet points. Thank you again, Martin, for taking the time to do this. I'm really flattered that you're doing this with us.
No, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come back on campus. It's kind of great.
It's kind of great, isn't it? Yeah, it's beautiful. We're in the newly renovated auditorium here at the Harlandale High School, and it's beautiful. And I'm glad that you were able to come back to the alma mater. Martin, when I was thinking about our conversation, I was saying, what's our jumping off point? Where do we start this story? And it occurred to me that maybe the best starting point is, as a young man in your late 20s, early 30s, you had an aspiration, and I always have to chuckle when I think about this aspiration because it's so specific. Your aspiration was to be a designer for Dillard's department stores, and here's the kicker. Dillard's department stores didn't even have a designer at the time, so you were aspiring to be something that did not even exist.
Yeah,
exactly. How about that as a jumping off point?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm retired now.
Okay.
So that was my last title.
Okay.
I'm glad I'm retired.
Okay.
You know, I was introduced to Dillard's like when I was 7. What most people don't know is one of the first stores that they opened was on Military Drive.
That's right.
And it was the first department store of that caliber that I had ever walked into. And I just remember walking in there, and, you know, they had the lighting that I'd never seen. You know, back then there was, you know, there wasn't the retail spaces that we have now. So I just got it in my head as a little boy. I mean, I think I was 7 or 8 when I started telling myself that I was going to design for Dillard's department stores. It's such an audacious dream. And I talk about that because I do think that you know, when I look at my life now, and I look at everything that has happened in my life, yeah, it's kind of wild.
It's wild, and yeah, for those of you who are too young to remember, the Dillard's department store was there, and the H-E-B is still in that parking lot, and Dillard's and H-E-B anchored a little strip mall there, but Dillard's was big time.
Oh, yeah.
So I can see how a 7 or 8 year old young man would walk in there and say, hey, I think I'd like to do this. And, you know, Martin, I think that's a good jumping off point, because you had, your aspiration was being fulfilled. You were hired by Dillard's, and I would say about 30 years old, and you were on your way to this aspiration when you came across someone that was going to change your life forever.
I had literally just graduated. I graduated from the University of Incarnate Word, but I had graduated from St. Mary's University before that. I went to SAC, graduated from SAC as well. But when I graduated from Incarnate Word College in those days with a fashion design degree and business degree, I had been inducted to Dillard's executive training program. But it was geared to creating executives. But, you know, in my head, I told myself, well, this will get me into the door.
You had a side plan.
And in those days, you know, I had a portfolio. I had gone to design school, and I carried it around literally and showed it to anybody and everybody who wanted to see it. And so Dillard's, I knew they were going to relocate me. And I was hoping that they were going to relocate me to Dallas-Fort Worth, because we had a divisional office there. At the time, Dillard's was looking into partnering with Walmart to go into Monterrey. And I was being trained for that. So they moved me to Corpus Christi to do my training. And the executive training program for Dillard's department stores was really prestigious. I was very lucky to even get in there because, you know, they weren't recruiting at local schools. They were recruiting at like Vanderbilt, you know, schools like that, TCU, Harvard. And I was so lucky that I was, you know, allowed to participate in that. But they moved me to Corpus to do my training. And I was not happy about it because I wanted to go to Dallas-Fort Worth.
It's not exactly the fashion mecca, you know?
No. And I just remember, you know, it was probably within the first month that, you know, I was so focused that I met Selena. And I didn't know anything about her.
Well, tell us about that meeting.
Yeah.
I understand it happened in a Woolworths.
It happened in a Woolworths.
Tell us about that meeting.
I was so focused, I never took a lunch, ever. And, you know, I'd get to the office, which was the store in Corpus, like 8 o'clock, sometimes even 7. And I would work through lunch. And the person that was training me in those days, you did... you know, I did merchandising. Then they were gonna, you know, you basically worked with the store manager, and you developed training for everything, shipping and receiving. Needless to say, she took me to eat at Woolworth, and I was sitting there, and Selena walked in, and she was at the Five and Dime. It was kind of like a dollar store,
right?
And she popped in to it was kind of like a little cafe. They were famous for it, and when I turned, I just remember telling the person that was with me, wow, who's that? Selena, she had just done press, I was told. She was wearing a cat suit.
You didn't know who she was?
I didn't know anything about Tejano. You know, I had assimilated to the white world. I was listening to Blondie and The Police, Depeche Mode. Tejano was not even in my, like, I didn't even know what Tejano was.
MTV. You were a child of MTV.
Yeah, I was a child of MTV. So, you know, I don't know what it was. I got a napkin, and I approached her, and I just tell her. I remember telling her, I hear you're famous, and she giggled, and she immediately looked at my badge, and she said, "You work at Dillard's?" And I was more embarrassed because I didn't take my badge off, and you know, I said, "Yeah, I work at Dillard's, but I'm an executive trainee. I'm really a fashion designer." And that's what started everything. And she was like, "Really, you're a fashion designer?" And, you know, we spoke for 30 minutes, you know, and And as I walked away, she had signed the napkin with the little heart, and she always put cuídate on it. And I walked away, and as I was walking, she says, call me. And I looked at her really kind of weird, and she giggled and left. And I just put the napkin in my pocket. I never noticed until later that she had written her number in the back. I never called her back. I never called her back. And probably weeks later, she came in and looked for me at the store.
Because she knew you worked at Dillard's.
Yeah, and she was more intrigued that I was a fashion designer. And it's weird because when I started design school at Incarnate Word, back then we had huge shows. I had just done a show. The media was really good to me. There was a reporter named Rosemary Budge who did all the collections. And she had done this huge article on me and my collection. And I had put it in my portfolio. And when Selena came in to the store, she found me. I hear my name on the intercom, and she was in the shoe department. And there was a bunch of people. I thought that there had been a slip and fall or an accident. And, as an executive trainee, that's what you do not want to deal with.
Right.
And I just remember thinking in my head, bleep, somebody hurt themselves, or there's a customer complaint. And as I walked into the department, because Dillard had the concept of the two stores kind of. Men's was on one side, women's was on the other. I noticed it with Selena. And the first thing she yelled at me was like, why haven't you called me? And I started giggling, and she came in, gave me a hug, and everybody was looking at me, But it's funny, that's how we met.
Wow. And, well, why hadn't you called her?
I wasn't interested. I didn't know her. I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know that
so Google didn't exist back then.
There was no Google. We didn't have cell phones. I remember I got my first cell phone through Selena, and I didn't. And I was so focused. Do you know what I mean? I wanted to finish my executive training. They had told me it could be as long as 2 years, and I literally was on a mission to get to the corporate office.
Well, you were there. That was your aspiration.
That was my aspiration. You were on your way. And for me, back then there wasn't really ready-to-wear, if you will. It wasn't what you see now. You had big designers that were in big, better department stores in New York. But we didn't have, there wasn't a Saks Fifth Avenue. We didn't have those stores in San Antonio. I wasn't aware of them. The only reason that I wanted to be a fashion designer is because I had started researching who a certain designer was named Bob Mackie, because I had seen it on television when I was a little boy. Mm-hmm. And I had seen that he had done like Cher, the Sonny and Cher show. He had done Carol Burnett. I had seen a movie when I was young, and that put a name to what I wanted to do. It was a movie named Mahogany. And I just remember Diana Ross. And I remember coming home, telling everybody I'm going to be a fashion designer, and being almost kind of disciplined. You can't do that. That's for girls. So I had kind of put a halter on it. And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. And then when I went to college at St. Mary's, I was going to go to law school. Give me
in context about how old were you at that time?
Oh, I must have been maybe nine, when I snuck in and saw that movie. Uh-huh. And then it's weird how time changes. And then you realize, well, it's not something you should be doing. I still would sketch. But I was now more interested in the college experience. I had seen Animal House. I wanted to go to college to have fun. I wanted to go to college to be in a fraternity. So college stopped being educational for me. I wanted to have the experience of having fun. And so St. Mary's for me was that. And then, the applying for law school, taking the LSAT, I realized once I did all that that's not what I wanted to do.
That was not what was, in your heart.
No. And at the time I was dating a girl who was a model. She graduated from here too, same year, 1982. And she had told me, well, there's a local school here and they have a fashion design program. You should try going. And I ended up, applying, got accepted, and I got my second degree from Incarnate Word. So being in Corpus for me was literally just one step to me getting closer to what I wanted to do, was to be a fashion designer.
And in your mind at the time, there was Selena, who you really didn't know much about, and she was a little bit more of a distraction from your dream than anything else. But she comes to the store. I mean,
and then we started hanging out. You know what I mean? And it's weird because I think that she was in a very insular world. I didn't realize just how famous she was. She was famous globally. I learned really fast how famous she was. She was famous all over the world. She was famous in Peru. She was famous in Guatemala. She was famous in Mexico. I knew none of that until I started hanging out with her. We started talking. She would call me on the phone. She'd pick me up for lunch. We'd ride around her car. And then we just started talking fashion. And in those days, I'd walk around with all these magazines. You know, we didn't have the internet. So, you know, I'd buy magazines. We used to have, there was a news shop downtown, and I would sometimes drive to the news shop where they had like Vogue, and they had a bunch of fashion magazines. And it was really, really geared to like the wealthy people in Alamo Heights and Olmos Park. But I would spend so much money on magazines. And so we just bonded. And I remember the first time she asked me to work for her, and I basically said, no, I can't. I mean, I thought I was so ridiculously lucky to have gotten chosen to be an exec, you know, an EDP. And later on, there's a few of us still around, you know, a lot of EDPs, because Macy's had one, you know.
EDPs?
Yeah, Executive Training Program.
Okay.
EDPs. It was called the Executive Development Program.
Okay.
And it was hard to get in. Only certain schools were recruited, big schools. So I was very lucky to just get in it. But later on, when I became an executive, we all talked about, there was all the EDPs were either CEOs, had become CEOs, had become vice presidents. And, you know, my last boss, who was the executive vice president, and she had been an EDP, and she said, you know why I hired you? She goes, because you were pre-law, you were in the executive development program, and you were a designer. And I thought, what a great combination. Yeah. And that was one of my last gigs. But, you know, it's weird that Selena was my first gig, my first literal paying gig as a fashion designer. And I'd been out of design school maybe 30 days.
Where your expressions, where your ideas actually manifested themselves. It came to being.
I think what ended up happening with Selena and I, we became really good friends. You know, I unguarded. Selena was very, very guarded. You know, she never was out by herself. She was already a global phenomenon. I just didn't know. And when she was around me, she wasn't on guard. You know, I was this guy, you know, I wore a suit when I was at work. And then when I was with her, I'd wear combat boots and cut off overalls. I had an earring. My hair was freaky. You know, when I was at work, I'd grease it down. When I was with her, it was wild. And I always had kind of a little feminine air. I didn't care. I always wore bandanas on as bracelets. You know, I'd rattle around with 25 bracelets on. And, you know, I always had a sketch pad. And so I discarded her. She kind of wasn't, you know, we just became friends. And as we became friends, I realized that she was really interested in fashion, and she could fund it. She had a lot of money. And I didn't know any of that. And when I started taking her serious was when she basically said, very, very emotionally, you know, we had already met. I had showed her my portfolio. She didn't even, when I told her I had a portfolio, she was freaking out. She goes, you have a portfolio? And I just think that her looking at my portfolio, she was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I want to do. And what ended up happening with Selena and I is I started sketching. Yeah, I sketch beautifully. Some of the sketches have been, you know, they've been on display all over the place. And so with Selena, seeing our ideas on paper really sparked something. And we had both been married for a few months. So we were honeymooners. We had so much in common. And it became kind of a really, really private relationship. Just friends, you know? And we would sit around, talk. We'd drive around we would drive around Corpus, just music blasting. And it's funny because most of the time cars would be following us, honking, because she was the only woman with the red Porsche. It was the only red Porsche in Corpus. And, I decided, to work with her, but not to really work with her. We were just going to be friends. So I started designing her costumes, in private. I did the Green Leaves was one of the first bustiers I did, which became the flamenco. And then she started loving it. And she, then it started with, I really, really need you to work for me. And I'm like, I can't. I have a goal. And then she basically, one day she just said, I want your name on the label. And I was like, really? And she goes, yeah. And then she goes, think about this. We can make a big brand. I'm going to open 2 stores. Then we started dreaming really big. Then we started dreaming Mexico. We started dreaming selling to Dillard's. We started dreaming selling to Salinas de Rocha in Liverpool and Mexico. And then finally, I said, I'm going to do it. I left my job at Dillard's and we didn't even have a contract yet.
What a step.
And then I was in New York, literally 48 hours after I resigned at Dillard's, I was in Manhattan.
Give us some context for time.
That was 1993. That was June of 1993. Mm-hmm. And
so it was a relative...
It was before the Grammy. It was before she even got nominated for the Grammy.
And so 1993, my Selena history, she was taken from us in 1995.
Well, a month before a month before her 24th birthday.
So this was a relatively short relationship, but man, this was intense, and things happened in 2 years.
Yeah, what we did.
So you gave up Dillard's.
Yeah, I gave up. I didn't give up Dillard's. Uh-huh. I resigned from Dillard's, thinking.
I'll get back to that.
I trust you. We had just become friends. I mean, the friendship became so strong.
What did you think that you were putting Dillard's on hold for something? What did you think you were putting it on hold for?
Well, I knew that Dillard's didn't have designers.
You were in the management area of Dillard's. Dillard's didn't even have designers.
No. So I knew that this gig would have given me the opportunity to add that moniker to my portfolio and to my resume. And the relationship had become so ridiculously tight. And I remember thinking, she talked me into her dream, which became my dream. And it just happened. I mean, the stuff that we did in like 2 years, it's like a month, less than 2 years, was crazy. But, it was a wild ride. And we later found out, now with history, it was the first celebrity brand ever.
Yeah.
And she was smart. She wanted not just to do a collection. By the time, I was going to New York a lot. I was going to Miami. I was going to LA. And we started looking into fragrance. We started looking into shoes. I had gone to Fanny. Back then, Fanny was, it was the New York market for accessories. I had become literally her official costumer. Anything after 93, I designed. Wow. All the big ones, those are mine. I think those are ours. I think the big thing that happened with Selena and I is the partnership was great because we talked about ideas, and I was able to illustrate everything. So anything that we did, I have an illustration for it that no one's ever seen. So that just went on, and what I realized is that I was going to have to build a factory. So I remember going to New York, looking for equipment, looking for mannequins, looking for wolf forms, looking for fabric. I mean, I was gone. I was moving. I don't think I slept. I was lucky if I slept 2 hours a night.
Were you creating things as you go, Martin? Or what? I mean, what did you use as a basis for creating a factory?
You had to. So basically, design school had taught me. So I had produced a fashion show. I was a producer of our senior year. I had basically started understanding manufacturing because I could sew. I could lay a pattern. What was so weird is with the brand was named Martin Gomez exclusively for Selena. I realized that if I was going to make a go of this, I was just going to have to basically go 150%. And I was in for it. I was going to do it. So I basically started, asking questions. I remember I would spend like 2 days in New York just walking around and asking people, okay, this is what I'm interested in doing, this is what, and everyone was really, really helpful. I was very, very fortunate that people were I like to talk. And what I ended up doing is I ended up making these little press kits that had a picture of Selena, then it had a picture of me, it had my background, then it had a few sketches of what the line was going to be, and then we had a picture of us together. What I didn't realize, this was, I call myself Forrest Gump because I was so lucky. I realized that the Garment Center in New York was pretty much ran by Latinos. So I remember the first time I showed this little press kit, and I still have some of the originals, people were like, that's Selena. And everybody knew who Selena was.
In New York.
So, in New York. And that was my entry point. I remember the first trip, I got us a $50,000 credit, which is crazy. And we got a $50,000 credit. What that means is you could buy on credit, you had to pay it within 6 months, and then things started shipping. I remember we got, our factory, our design area was in Q Productions. It was in shambles. It was just a big garage. They had focused on the production studio, which was in the front. It was in thirds. The middle was just open space. And Selena called it her studio, but there was nothing there. There was a table. And then on the top floor, there was kind of like her studio where she would practice. Because Selena didn't really practice, but she practiced her moves. And Selena gave me that as my studio. And I just started putting out ads. And everything was so weird because I didn't want to mention Selena's name because I had realized how famous she was. So I started interviewing costureras. And I kept on thinking, where am I going to find seamstresses in Corpus Christi? Oh, yeah. And when you think we produced 2 of the best fashion shows, New York style fashion shows. All that we did, we created a factory, we put out a collection, we opened up 2 stores, we did 2 huge fashion shows, we sold good product. I mean, when you think of all that happened within 2 years.
Wow. It's incredible.
But it was work. It was working literally day and night. And I think one thing about Selena is she was so ridiculously kind, but she understood good work. And she understood that I was there to do good work. And there wasn't a day where we met, because we met a lot, where she was so gracious, so thankful. It was always, thank you for doing this. Because it had been her dream. She had hired seamstresses before, but none of them, I'm not going to say what she said because it was private, but she didn't want to work with any of them. I remember when I started interviewing seamstresses, I'm like, well, you've worked with some, can we hire them? And she goes, no. And I'm like, okay. And I knew better. With Selena, we moved forward, but it was a lot of work. And, it's funny because it was one of the best times of my life. And it literally was the saddest thing that ever happened to me. And it lasted, the sadness lasted till now. By the time I met Selena, I had already lost my brother. I'd lost my parents. But the Selena thing hit different because we had become such good friends. I think what ends up happening when you have 2 young people who are just dreaming and you're seeing your dreams come true, you bond. When I see like singers that are partners, or when you see partners that are creating something, you bond, you become family. And that's what happened with Selena and I.
You built something together.
We built it. And now, it's iconic, right? It's become, for a long time I left to forget about it. And now it's probably one of, I've done some incredible things in my life that I'm very proud of.
You certainly have.
I'm really proud of my work with Selena. I'm proud that my legacy is attached to her legacy. I'm proud that there is a label out there, Martin Gomes exclusive for Selena, that people know. You'd be surprised the calls I've gotten from people who, famous, really famous people who say, God, we just loved what you guys did. So it's a big, big thing for me, the Selena. My Selena era is very special.
Oh, yeah.
And it's my first gig. Can you imagine it being your first gig?
I cannot.
It was my first gig. It's crazy, man. But Yeah, that's how it started for me.
Wow. And, and you talk about a legacy. My family and I went to a Dia de los Muertos festival at Civic Park, and artists are, covering her music still.
Oh, yeah.
And mimicking her style. And from 95, she passed, taken from us way too early. What are we now, 30 years away from that?
Yeah.
And the legacy's so strong. The impact's still so strong. It's going to
all over the world. I've lived all over the world, and there's not a moment in time where someone will stop me. I'm very guarded when it comes to that part of my life. So I've been very lucky that people are very, very delicate. They're very sweet. But it's been ongoing. Even when I ran some huge teams globally. And as soon as someone would find out, they were very respectful, but everybody, including the presidents and CEOs, wanted to know about her.
Of course.
So it's a legacy that I'm very proud of. And, it's weird. I have a daughter who's in design school. She's graduating this year. She's in Paris, France. And, she tells me, she goes, God, Dad, I can't imagine that being your first gig. Yeah, it's crazy when I think about it.
And without really, the first gig is amazing, but I think it's amazing because there's not a frame of reference. There's not anything that you can draw back.
There wasn't. When you think, I literally was walking around blindfolded, and some things worked, some things didn't. And one thing about Selena was very, very clear on what we were going to do. She wanted to do it. This is what we're going to do, and we did it.
Well, Martin, what I'd like to know, take us from an idea that originated in your head or in Selena's head, became a sketch, and how does it end up on the stage?
Some of the biggest collaborations were her costumes. Selena wanted to start wearing costume. She had always, she played around with kind of pretending to be design, but she really didn't. I think that, it's weird when somebody passes away so young. The stories become bigger. There's no such thing with Selena. I mean, it is what it is. However, some of the stories about her designing or doing this, some of those aren't really real. She did design when she was little, but the only collection Selena ever did was our collection. And that collection was 100% collaborative. I mean, she'd call me on the phone. Most of the time she didn't know where she was. And it was at all times of the night. And I remember it was either I was at Dillard's and I'd get a phone. She called me so much at Dillard that the operator would just say, it's Selena. And then she started calling me at home. And then when I was at the studio, when I left Dillard's and went to Q Productions, she'd call me there. Selena was the first person who gave me a Motorola. Yeah, my first cell phone was, Selena gave it to me.
In 93, wow.
Can you imagine? And we would just talk, and, or I would come back with ideas. It had gotten so comfortable that she would say, oh, just design me something for this. And if she liked it, because remember, it started with the sketch. So she loved the fact that she could see it. One thing that fascinated her was the fact that I could illustrate it. Mm-hmm. And she was like, wow. And it was beautiful. So a lot of times she would change something, she'd write it, on the sketch, or she would say, I love it, let's move on. By the time I started working with her, by July of 93. She got nominated for a Grammy like in January.
After July. You started in July.
In July.
6 months later.
Oh, yeah. And I was working for her. I had done Green Leaves, which there's pictures of that on the internet, very rare, but it was the first bustier. It's the green, which turned out to be the flamenco. And then I started, designing what she was going to wear. And then little by little, she basically says, I want to do a collection. And that's when she said, let's put your name on the collection. That was her coming in. We literally sat at a table. I would sketch, she'd have ideas, and then I started going to New York. I call her from New York a lot because I was just buying fabric. I was just buying stuff. I'd buy mannequins. I would buy zippers. We had now become Selena's design house, and we had become a business. And now we didn't even have the structure. We didn't have people. Selena's design house was just her and I. And then little by little, I started hiring people. I started hiring seamstresses. I was very lucky because we hired this one woman. She was from Mexico. Her name was Maria Perez. It's the best thing we ever did. And she had worked at Alto Costera, which was high couture in Mexico. And she was cleaning houses at the time, and she wanted to work. And I remember I couldn't speak a lick of Spanish. So a lot of times our collaboration was me sign language. Así. And little by little, Maria Perez taught me, how to speak some sewing terms. But she was my main seamstress, and it just was working really well. And it worked really well for a year until it didn't, and then, and it's weird because I ran away from that legacy for a long time. I basically, after Selena died, I went back. I was asked to go back to Dillard's. I was very, very lucky because it was all over the news. So I get called by the people at Dillard's. I had really good connections at Dillard's. When I left Dillard's to go work with Selena, I spoke to everybody. And I was really hoping that they would talk me out of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And they didn't. They
Oddly,
were so kind. And they were like, no, this is a chance of a lifetime. You should do it. So I did it. So once Selena, I left Selena 60 days before she died. So I just remember calling one of my mentors at Dillard's, and I said, I know what I'm going to do. And she says, hold on. And then 2 days later, I was called, you should come back. And I finished my executive training in McAllen, Texas. And then it started rolling. And then they moved me to Fort Worth. And I just remember by the time I got to Fort Worth, I remember getting called by MTV. And I hadn't even been in New York yet with Dillard's. I got called by Viacom, and they wanted to do a Behind the Music on Selena. Selena and I did the first Behind the Music. And I just remember thinking, I don't want to talk about it. And I ended up agreeing to it.
And this was after she had passed.
This was after she had passed. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to do this interview. I had done interviews with like Dateline right after she died, or 2020, I remember. But then I cut it. I said, no more. It was just too emotional. But then this was different. This was going to be about, they had pitched it very differently to me. They had pitched it that they were going to talk about her music, and then we were going to talk about the fashion part of it. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I agreed to film it, and we filmed it. And then I just remember I did my training at Fort Worth, and then they immediately moved me to Little Rock, Arkansas. And back then, they didn't even know what to call me. So they were calling me a product coordinator. And I just remember I get to Little Rock, Arkansas, and immediately they were like, okay, we want you to go to New York. And I'm like, really? And I just remember flying into New York. What I didn't realize, and this was like maybe 6 months after I had done the Behind the Music, and I get to my first appointment, and the lady looked at me, she goes, are you Selena's fashion designer? And I said, yeah. And I was kind of shocked, and I didn't ask anything else. And she was a Puerto Rican woman. What I didn't realize is the evening that I flew in, MTV had aired the Behind the Music.
Oh.
So it was everywhere. And I just remember thinking, this is scary, But that started my career at Dillard's. And within probably 2 years, I became their fashion designer.
And it was, it was a jumping off point for sure. It was, it propelled really the rest of your career in global sourcing, product development, global compliance, fabric R&D.
My last post was huge. I mean, my last post, I was commuting between.
Well, you're calling it your last post. This is when you were worldwide.
I retired from that post, because it was just, I had been working so much and I was so focused that I kind of, people knew what my life was. My life back then, because we're skipping through a lot, right?
Sure.
Towards kind of my last post. But my last post, I was running 2 multi-billion-dollar sourcing, design, product development platforms. And I was doing it commuting. I didn't drive. I had a driver. Literally, I had 2 children. I had a son in high school, a daughter in middle school. I was living a big, big life. I was living in an old mansion, an old estate. I had an apartment in Hong Kong. And my life was working in one city for a week. My driver would pick me up on Sunday, like at 4 a.m. I'd hop on a plane. I'd go to New York. I'd work in New York for maybe 5 days. Then my driver would pick me up at midnight, drive me over to Mahwah, New Jersey, where I ran another company. This was all the same conglomerate. And then I would work in Mahwah and then work there for a week, and then I'd get picked up. They'd take me to Kennedy, and then I'd fly to Hong Kong. Then I'd work in Hong Kong, and then I'd work in Hong Kong for a week. Then I'd fly to India, to Delhi, and then I would work in Delhi. Then I would fly sometimes to Korea, sometimes to Shanghai, sometimes to Bangladesh. And that was my life. And I was just living it. It was just your life. Mm-hmm. But what ended up happening was I was tired and I loved it. But I realized through my children's life that I had missed my son. In between I did interviews with CNN. And it was at one of those interviews that my son got accepted to Cornell. And I stayed in New York. They flew back. And I missed all that. I missed the yelling of him getting accepted to Cornell. I missed that, and I remember thinking, well, it's hard. It's a huge paycheck.
That's
right?
a big price to pay.
And you're making a lot of money. I mean, it was crazy, the life I lived. And I just thought, it's time. And I had been asked for years, since after Selena died, because you have to remember, Selena died, and then we went into producing the movie. So it became global, and then I just started doing then I started designing for Dillard's. Mm-hmm. But I've lived a pretty crazy life. Good, I'm not complaining, because I used to always, when I would get tired and it wasn't like I was going to like little bitty towns. I was going to Paris and London. I'd go to Paris 4 times a year. I'd go to London maybe 3 or 4. I'd go to Milan. I'd go to Barcelona. And it was like glamorous. It wasn't, I had drivers. I ate at the best restaurants. I'd eaten at probably 15, 20 Michelin restaurants. I've worked in over 20 countries, and it was great. But I had to remember I had a family.
Right.
And, I'd come home to this mansion, and I'd see normally I'd come home, my kids were asleep, and now they were active, so they didn't want to be around, they were all active. But, I remember thinking, you're living your dream, dude. What are you complaining about? But, I was fortunate enough, I retired at 54, which I think is too early, by the way. Mm-hmm. But I retired to write this book, because I'd basically been told, you got to write this book, you got to write this book. And it was my kids who basically had told me at a New York trip, Dad, just got to write this down. So that's where I'm at now. But I don't want to skip over some of your questions.
Well, there's just so much. And you bring up your book, and I would like to know, you retired to write the book. Where is that project?
So it's done. So right now, what it is I went through a whole process of trying to figure out where my archives were going to go. I have a lot of archives, a lot of sketches, a lot of stuff, gowns, not just my Selena stuff, my Dillard stuff. And I realized a long time ago that people wanted to know about it, and a lot of times I'd shy away from it. But little by little, I'd get asked to do something and I'd be like, no, I'm not interested. I'm not a kind of guy that's into accolades. I don't need to have, I've been offered, alumni, what do you call them? Alumni, distinguished alumni stuff. I'm like, no, I don't need that. My thing was work and being able to work in the fashion business has been very good to me and my family. But, I started, after a certain period of time, you start thinking, what's your legacy? Yeah, I have 2 children. They're beautiful children, smart, very successful. But I started thinking, okay, it's time for me to kind of take back this legacy that I have, because I had been shying away from it. And then I started reading, anything that's in the all you have to do is Google my name and you see it all. But I started noticing that the fans were updating everything. And I was just so touched that they knew everything. They knew everything about me. They knew the real stories, but they didn't know all the stories. And they, it's funny because I think the Selena legacy, it's owned by someone, and, they started sharing some of that without me in it. And then fans would get upset. They're like, Martin, why don't you say something? And I'm like, you know what I mean? I'll write a book. I didn't think about that. And then I was asked to do this book. And I remember my son was graduating from Cornell. My daughter had just got accepted to Parsons in Paris. And I thought, well, I think I have enough money. You never have enough money, by the way. These schools cost a lot of money. But I remember thinking, it's a time for me. I had worked with colleges. I lectured everywhere. I lectured at Cornell. I lectured at Sorbonne in Paris. I lectured, I lectured at Incarnate. I lectured at a lot of schools.
Incarnate Word here in town.
Yeah. And the engagement to these kids, I would go to these engagements expecting maybe 20. I'd get 200, or I'd get 500. I'd get 1,000. I mean, it was a ton of people. Yeah. And afterwards, I always stayed for pictures and to kind of have communion with these people. And most of them, all they wanted to know is the story. Like, what happened? How did you do this? And I just remember thinking, you know what? I'm going to write it. I think I'm going to write it, but I'm a dyslexic. And I kept on thinking, well, can I write it or can I not? So I reached out. One of the first books written about Selena was written by Joe Nick Potonsky, who was one of the head writers at Texas Monthly. Him and I had become friendly for years, and every time there was an interview he wanted me to do, I'd give a soundbite because I was always so busy. So I reached out to him and I said, you know what, I kind of want to write a book, but I want to write it. I don't want a ghost. You can easily get a ghost, and then and I said, but I want to write it because I think it's important. And I had written. I realized later in life that I was smart. Being creative and smart, sometimes those two terms don't coexist. Let me tell you, as a creative, most people will put you...
It depends on how you define smart. Creativity, my goodness.
Yeah, but you have to remember, when you're designing clothing or you're designing, something in the arts, people put you in a bucket. And you are a creative, you're an artist, you're a designer, you're whatever. But I learned when I was at Dillard's that in order for me to be successful, I had to learn finance. And finance at the biggest platforms. I'm talking multi-billion-dollar platforms. And I learned it, and I learned that I could count and that I could understand finance. So I remember thinking, well, if I'm going to write a book, in order for me to control it, I'm going to have to do it myself. So I remember I just started doing an outline on what happened to me. And then I would reach out to Joe Nick. And I have other friends that are authors. And they would all say, your story's crazy. You have to write about it. So I said, before I do any of this, I have to reach out to Abraham. And I hadn't spoken to Abraham since the funeral. And one of the first...
You started writing this book.
I started thinking about this book in 2019.
And since 1995. You had not spoken to Abraham?
Not spoken to Abraham at all. And I had started, because of Joe Nick says, just write it. Just write what you know. So I remember I had an executive, when you go to executive big meetings, they give you these bound books. And I just started writing. I would sit around and I'd go to the park, or, my office is on the 4th floor of my house, and at the view of Lake Superior. I remember one day I just started writing it, and I thought, I'm going to write how I met her. That's the first thing I want to do. So I just started writing it longhand. That book is on display at the Wentliff.
Wow. And
I just remember writing it, and it was so emotional that I said, I can't do this. And I put it away. And then I remember thinking, I'm just going to write my memories down, but I need to reach out to Abraham. So I reached out to him, and I remember I called him. No one picked up. Left a message. Within maybe 2 minutes, he called me back. And it was such an emotional phone call. And he couldn't even understand me. It was so emotional. And then he basically said, come see us. I had not been into the museum or anything. And I remember I went over, him and I had like a 6-hour, we spoke, we had lunch, and it was emotional. And I just said, I've got to write about this, you know, and that's what started it. And,
if I may ask, was he receptive to?
Yeah, well, you know, he was receptive. It's weird because Abraham has always been kind to me. Stern, but kind. And by the time I met Abraham again, I was a man. I had ran these businesses. I wasn't there to ask for permission.
Right.
I was there to be respectful to my friend's father, period. The experience was my experience.
Right.
It just so happened it was between Selena and I. But I wanted to be respectful. I'm a respectful person.
Well, of course. I mean, your respect for her.
And I wanted him to know that it wasn't going to be these books that have been, it was just going to be about us creating this brand. And you know, I didn't even know what it was going to be. I wanted to write my stories down. So I just remember it was very emotional. I left. He wanted me to meet with his daughter, who was going to be running Key Productions. And they had never seen any of the sketches. Because, you know, me working with Selena was just Selena and I, and then the person who killed her. That's it. Nobody else. Selena kept it very, very, very private. But when I started writing the book, I remember I didn't have a computer. I had a business computer, but it was the company's computer. I remember I went and bought a computer. I bought a writing computer, and where you could write it and then you could listen to it. And I wrote the first. I just wrote the chapter, right? I ended up sending it to Joe Nick, and I flew into San Antonio, and we met in Green, Texas. And he was like, "You can write."
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. I haven't seen you writing, but I'm not surprised. I can't wait.
He says, "You need to do this," and that's what started it.
We all are saying that. You need to do this.
Well, and that's what started it. But you know what I mean. The book's done. It's in review now. The book proposal is in review. I agreed to do the book if the book could be helpful and if it could be inspiring to young creatives, and that we can do something good with the book. You know, for me, that's my legacy. My legacy now, if you know me, if you Google me, it's all about working with young creatives. I work with a lot of them all over the world. I lecture a lot about this. I lecture about my career because it's funny. My Selena time was fine. It was fun. It was great. It was tragic, but the life I had after is crazy. I mean, it's private jets, mansions. It's living in Hong Kong in a penthouse. It's going to some of the best fashion shows in the world. It's traveling and this is a kid who had nothing as a kid. I mean, as a young child here, I was in band.
A drum major.
I was the drum major for two consecutive years. It's funny because I could read music before I could read. Yeah, I didn't learn to read until way later. You know, I realized when I tried to apply to college that I was reading at a 5th grade level. So my first degree is from SAC, and I had to go to Learning Lab. But then I'm a quick study. Afterwards, I'm like, I can do this. I can get another degree. And then I got another degree. And then I got another degree. And I think it nurtured, you know, it's funny. And that's what I want to share with young people. You know, one success will lead to another success, will lead to another success. And dream audaciously, dream big, you know, but be honest with yourself. You know, you can't expect to be a grand actor, a grand fashion designer, a grand architect, and stay in San Antonio. You know, when I think of how brave I was to basically just leave. You know, I had no money. I was on a tightrope, and there was no net to catch me. I just took off and did it, and prayed for the best.
A leap of faith. I want to come back to that, Martin. I want to come back. There's a specific point that I'd like to circle back to before we get off of the book. When might we see it on Amazon or in a bookstore?
You know,
because we want to read that book.
Yeah, we're a year, maybe a year and a half out.
Okay.
like I said, the proposal's in review, then it goes into peer review. The book's done.
Mm-hmm.
We have to add. So I have the most incredible editor. She's super, super well known. She's Irish, Lindsay Spence. She has written some of the best-selling books in Europe, in London. Mm-hmm. And she called me. And she so happened to be a Selena fan when she was little, when she found out about the story. Mm-hmm. So she had always thought about Selena. Mm-hmm. And then she pulled me up on the internet and she called me and she says, I want to write a book about Selena. And I said, I can't help you, I'm writing a book. Mm-hmm. And then she asked me if we could share transcripts. She was working on a book about Vivian Lee that just got optioned for a movie. I mean, this girl is so, so successful. Mm-hmm. And she's become one of my closest friends, my therapist, if you will. So she's my editor. So we are at 55,000 words. We want to be about 65. 65 is a good memoir. 60 is a good. Anything over 60 is a novel. Don't want to do that. But I'm very particular on how the book reads. I want people to be able to read it, close their eyes, and see it. The book is fun, but it's tragic and it's sad and it's scary because I went through a lot with what happened to her. A lot happened. So I think it's a year and a half out, maybe sooner. The work's done. Now, like I said, it's in review, then I'll go into peer review. I've partnered with such a good foundation to do this book. So hopefully in a year.
Well, we're going to ask you to keep us informed.
For sure.
We need to shout that out. I'm looking forward to it myself personally.
I get hit on Instagram probably like every day. Like, when is this book going to be already? When is it ready? Well, so many people, because I've been talking about this with the fans for years because I wanted to hear their opinion about it. I kind of wanted them to understand that this book for me is more a psychological journey, an emotional journey than it is this. Sure. And I want people to know I'm writing it because I want people to know how heartfelt it is. Yeah. And it really is a story about these two Mexican kids who had this audacious dream, and one so happened to be very famous. And then it's me. But, it's a beautiful written story. The weirdest thing is when I sent my transcript over to Lindsay, she came back, she goes, this is really good. And so she says, but we need to work on moving it around a little bit. And so that's what we did for the last 2 years. We've been working, readjusting, the book on how, every chapter is different. So you have to place it differently. And I'm not an author. So when I was writing it like it happened, this happened, this happened. And sometimes a better read is if you move the last chapter to the front. And with Lindsay, I've had the opportunity because she's a best-selling author. I mean, you pull her up and she's so ridiculously impressive. And the fact that she called me and then she agreed to be my editor. I mean, it's been an incredible journey writing this book. But not only that, I think for me, being engaged with young people to me is the biggest thing. And the fact that I get to come here. I do a lot of these things. And some of them are such big productions. It's crazy. I did something for Hulu and there was like 100 people. And they wanted me to shoot in a certain place. And I said, I want to do it at the design studio at Incarnate Word. And they let me. And they normally don't, but they let me do it. And they shut down the school, and it was such an incredible experience. And it was with Hulu. It was with Hulu. It was with Juju Chang, and I'm friends with Juju. And it was such an incredible experience. And so I've done a lot of them. But I will tell you, coming back here is kind of crazy. When you're in high school, you can't see in front. You can't see the camel in front of the trees. You can't see it. You're too busy being young, right? And when I was young, I had fun here. I was a popular kid. I was super active, but I had no goals. I had no plans. I had dreams, if you will. I wasn't even planning to go to college. I was a lifeguard, and my plan was to be a lifeguard. I think I had planned to go to Acapulco because I had done saltwater and I had done.
You'd have probably been a very good one.
Well, I was a lifeguard for 10 years. So I thought, well, this is something I can do. So I just remember going to SAC with the girl I was dating, who ended up being my wife. She's now my ex-wife, but still very good friends with her. And if it wasn't for her, I would have never gone to college. But, coming back here, and it's so weird when you lived this life, because I'm fortunate. I'm constantly reminded about my life. I am with people in the business, in the fashion business, that want me to talk here, or people that call me for advice because they're opening, or they're going to open up an IPO, or a young designer that has gotten a new gig and wants to know if the contract's good enough. So I'm constantly reminded about my career and how lucrative and how intense it was. Mm-hmm. And it does not get lost in me that I was this kid that sat here for talent shows. I was this kid that had no plans for any type of future. Mm-hmm. We had no money. My mother was a single mother. She worked as a maid. I had no plans other than what I was going to do the weekend. I didn't even have a vehicle. Mm-hmm. So when you think of my life and living all over the world, traveling all over the world, being invited to some of the best things in the world. And now I'm in a different place. Now, after a while, you start thinking, how can you be of help? How can all this experience be of help?
Right.
And so I'm there now. I don't. Purpose. Well, it's all about purpose. When you think about life, we're just too young and naive and maybe a little stupid mm-hmm. and selfish to realize what purpose is. And for those of us, I have a son who is so ridiculously smart, and he understands purpose. He has this huge job at 26, but he understands it. But it does not get lost how privileged he has been. And my kids grew up with people telling them about their dad. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't get lost with me. Now, after living this global world, I'm back here in San Antonio. I'm living in the south side of town by choice because I want to finish the book.
Welcome
here.
Back.
Well, I realized how joyous it is. I run every day. I sometimes just go to HEB just to walk around. I have not been, my children were not.
I can relate.
Well, my children were not raised amongst Mexican people. Mm-hmm. And so now when my kids come, they love it. And now, I don't do things. I don't want to go to a ball. I don't want to post pretentious stuff on Facebook. I've surpassed that. Mm-hmm. My job now is making sure that my legacy is helpful, that people understand, people that have no other choice because they inherited nothing, can believe that a dream can happen, but it's not easy. It can be scary. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but it can happen. And you can achieve greatness from coming from nothing. So that's why, when you asked me to do this, I was already pretty sick of talking about myself. Mm-hmm. I had done, doing the media for the Wentliff collection, which is just to get asked. I basically am giving my archives to the Wentliff, working with the Wentliff. If people don't know what the Wentliff is, they should. If you're a Texan, you should know what the Wentliff is. It is magnificent. I like to call it the Smithsonian of Texas. When I did it, Taylor Sheridan, who produced and wrote Yellowstone, he basically, right after me, he was touring at the same time, he basically is donating his archives to the Wentliff. He's donating $40 million to the Wentliff. And I just thought, that's what life is. Mm-hmm. You can't take it with you. Mm-hmm. I'm fortunate enough, I have two very, very successful kids. But, for me now is talking about this, not to brag but no, it's to basically give these young people the understanding that yeah, you can do it. Yeah, dream big. And you don't have to be a basketball player or a football player.
Well, that's going to segue. That's kind of you're kind of segueing into the point that I wanted to come back. In your book or in your reflection, if it doesn't make the book, destiny and how destiny plays a role. You mentioned earlier in our conversation that you were a young man and there were forces in your world that were suppressing a dream and saying that's not a boy thing, that's not a young man thing. And so there were forces in your world that unfortunately were suppressed, but fortunately they didn't. But unfortunately, they were suppressing a dream. And I think of you, and I think of, I can't help of, it's a hard work and blood, sweat, and tears, no doubt about that. But I think of you in destiny because you didn't call Selena back.
No, no.
You were at Woolworth.
When I think about that, I laugh.
Yeah, and Woolworth has played a role in a lot of American history. But I think that we have to put the diner bar meeting between you and Selena on that list of historic things that occurred. But there was a destiny, and you never gave up on that. And speak to that. And to a person that feels like maybe not all the forces are aligned right now for to help me out, but sticking with it.
Oh, I've had some hard lessons. One of my first presentations as a designer for Dillard's, it was probably the first. In those days, I illustrated everything, and I had started making samples. I would make 2 samples for a collection. And I remember I had a boss who was tough. And it was the day before I was going to present to the Dillards and some of the vice presidents. I remember I'm the lowest of the totem pole. I don't even have at that time, I didn't even have a title. They were calling me product coordinator. And I remember I had everything hanging on a bar, and she was like, ugh. She threw everything on the floor. Everything. I think there was like 2 garments left. And she wrote X's on the sketch, and they were my collection. I mean, I was heartbroken. I got angry afterwards, but I was heartbroken. And then the blood rushes out of my body because I'm petrified. Because I'm like, what am I going to do? And so, I just remember thinking, you can't quit now. Right. I just remember thinking, you can't quit now. And I just stayed up all night. And yes, I couldn't show the samples, but I could redo the sketches. And the samples were in the same fabric, so I could crumple up the samples and show the fabric. So stuff like that. I realized early that setbacks were going to happen. But when I was younger, creatives, if you have a creative as a parent, they're different. It's different. I had a creative and an athlete. My son was so ridiculously good at athletics. In every country. He played soccer. Then we went to Hong Kong. He played rugby. He became the captain there. Then he came back. He played lacrosse. He became the captain there. He became an All-American. I mean, he was so gifted, and he was smart. He'd walk in, and he'd walk out with 100 friends. My daughter, it would take her a month to just get one friend. And I remember one time my daughter, she's in her room, and I was leaving for work, and I was going to be gone for a week. And I go, honey, how's it going? She goes, Dad, will you pray that I make a friend? And it broke my heart. But I remember telling her, it's not about making friends, Katerina. It's literally about putting out who you are. If you do that and you're honest, your friends will come. And I just remember, we still talk about that. But when I was younger, I almost put that away because I was bullied so much. I was a different kid. I liked to dress a certain way. Everything had to match. And I just think people picked up on that. And then I played band. And, I realized right away that I was going to have to present differently. I wasn't going to be bullied. I wasn't. But creatives are different because they're highly sensitive. So for me, a lot of the lectures, I do big lectures on this because if you look at people that are very successful, And I mean very successful. In your senior picture, that's your creative. In your senior picture, that person who became the CEO or that person who became a high-powered attorney, not everybody has to be popular. I was a popular kid here. I'll be really honest with you. I was a popular kid here. I loved my time at this school. I had fun. But I had gone through the middle school bullying, and I had kind of learned how to change things. But, you know, I will tell you, sometimes I think when you're young and you're poor, you sometimes don't think you have any choices. And to me, that's why I do this. Mm-hmm. That's why, because when we spoke, we met at a restaurant, remember?
Right, yes.
And I'm high on ethics, super high on ethics. The Dillard's family told me that. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be truthful with you. Because I think what ends up happening, and I see it all the time, people fluff on their resumes. Don't do it. People lie. You know, I've seen so many people, I use the word charlatan, because there's no need for it.
They're faking their way through lying.
And it comes back. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, we're seeing a lot of that now. And it can be devastating. But for me, I think that all the setbacks led me to my life. So I don't know that I would change anything. I wouldn't change anything. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I went through a lot of that after Selena died. Mm-hmm. Because I should not have left. This would not have happened if I had not left. That was a burden I carried for a long time. Therapy is fixing that. Yeah. But I mean, when you go through such tragedy, and Selena and I, all we did was talk about our dreams. Selena wanted to go to acting. She wanted to open up stores all over the place. I mean, I'd never heard someone have so many dreams. So it rubbed off on me. So I think the sad part between our story is that every single thing that I told her I was going to do, everything I did. You know, for a long time, I'd write lists. I would create these storyboards. Every single thing, and it's audacious. The stuff that I would put on. Think about this. You know, I am like at Saks, at SAC. And I remember my board had that I was going to live in a mansion, and that I was going to drive a Mercedes-Benz, and I was going to have a Rolex. And back then, it's all pretense. Back then, it's all materialistic, because you don't know anything. Exactly. To you, all you think is having the great shoes, or having clothes, or having a good car. That's all that kind of matters when you're a certain age, right? Mm-hmm. You don't really learn that until later when you start working. But for me, my first storyboards were about that. Mm-hmm. Later on, they became deeper. Mm-hmm. But when I look back now at my age, I turned 62 tomorrow. And when I think of what I've done, it still kind of freaks me out.
It's incredible, Martin.
Yeah, it still freaks me out. Mm-hmm. So I think it is up to me to share that mm-hmm. with young people, you know, that sometimes think you don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. You know, in my day, we all wanted to go to the north side. You know, this city was very segregated. We all wanted to live in Alamo Heights. So when I moved back here, I could live anywhere I wanted, anywhere. I remember I went to the Dominion. That didn't look the way it did when I was young. I went to Elm Creek. I was looking at Almus Park, at some of the biggest houses. You know, my house was 11,000 square feet on 3 acres. It was massive, gorgeous. So I was like, that's why I want to live in San Antonio. And after doing all that, I kept on thinking, why? You know, my children are gone. So I'm going to live in this big old house so that I can impress people I don't even know. And it changed the game for me. So now when I'm in San Antonio, you know, I get invited to a lot of things. I don't need to go to a ball. I don't need to go to a country club. I've done it. I've done way better country clubs. I don't need that anymore. Now for me is coming here. I was invited to this. I couldn't do it. I was so upset that I'm always overbooked. I was invited to this show that the ex-Kelly people, the ex-Levi people, Levi Strauss, mm-hmm. there's a bunch of costureras, seamstresses that created a little organization, and they were doing a fashion show. Mm-hmm. I wanted to go so bad. Mm-hmm. I couldn't because I had meetings. And you know how publishing meetings are. I have to cancel something. Right. I cannot miss this publishing. A lot of people are getting paid for this, and I couldn't go. See, those are the stuff I want to go to.
Right.
So my life has changed a lot. Now living in the South Side to me, and it's only temporary. I'm only going to be here until I finish this book, because when I publish this book, I want to present it in San Antonio, Texas.
Good.
People always say, you're not going to present it in Corpus? No, I want to present it here.
Good.
And everything that I do now has to be meaningful, not just for me, but for the legacy. And it has to be meaningful for my children. The Wintliff, me sharing my archives with the Wintliff, that's meaningful to me, because people will be able to see my archives for free. I went around and met with a lot of museums, and everybody wanted a profitability factor. They wanted it. I'm like, no, this has to be accessible to everyone.
Good for you.
Well, and I talk about this. I mean, think about this. A family of four in this day and age, you go, and even if it's $10, it's still money they could be using for food, for gas. So for me, it's accessibility. And the other thing that's super important is I want people to see this Mexican kid, not Latino, not Hispanic, this Mexican kid from south side of San Antonio who graduated from Harlandale High School, graduated from St. Mary's University, graduated from SAC, graduated from Carnet Word, who couldn't read in the 8th grade. So, there's so many things that I want to share with these young people, and that's what my life is going to be going forward. And that's where I'm at now.
Well, we certainly hope to keep in touch with you, and I hope that you use our platform to shout some of these things out so that we know what you're doing. We're certainly looking forward to the book, and we just can't tell you how much we appreciate that you spent your time here.
Literally, it's funny because I think I would not have met you if it wasn't for my accountant,
right?
Bobby Mendes.
Credit to Bobby who brought us together.
Oh yeah, I needed an accountant when I came in. My accountants were all in Minnesota, and because of Bobby, and Bobby basically, and I remember because there for a while I never even mentioned. My history starts at St. Mary's, and it wasn't. I remember. I think you even questioned, did he honestly graduate from the school? And it's funny because
I was not aware of your story, and Bobby called me and he says, "There's an alum here that you need to meet." And I asked the name, and honestly, had not heard your story.
Yeah.
And so called you immediately, and we visited and met at the restaurant and said, we got to tell the story to our community.
I'm very grateful for you inviting me. I mean, like I said, I've done a lot of these, but this one's very special to me.
It is special.
Well, it's funny because now we have the easy way of looking people up through Google.
Right.
And, it's funny because my son was doing a project with ChatGPT. He said, "Dad, we pulled your ChatGPT." He goes, "It was crazy." And my kid's very private, and there's a couple of Martin Gomez. One's a famous soccer player, but it says in there that although there's a famous soccer player, Martin Gomez, the designer, is the one that people look up more than anybody. And I was like, really? I didn't even know what ChatGPT was. I'm barely getting into Instagram. You know what I mean?
Right.
I normally had a team of people doing that. Now I enjoy communicating with fans. Sometimes you have to be very careful.
Yes,
especially in San Antonio, where you can become highly identifiable.
Sure, anywhere.
But it's really nice now. Like I said, being back home. Like I said, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but I'm going to enjoy it as long as I can.
Well, we are glad that your circle has brought you back here, and welcome back while you are here. We'll see you at the HEB.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I figure, it's always the Selena thing, and then it's my career, and there's still so much more in my career, but it would take hours.
It would take hours. We have to do a series.
Well, I mean, there's so many other companies I work for that I figure if people wanted to know, they could Google or look at LinkedIn, because there's so many other companies that I interfaced with, I worked with. So many designers that I worked with. But I mean, I'm glad that we took the time to talk about my time with Selena, and I'm glad that we took my time to talk about, how it was growing up, because I think that's so important. So I commend you for that.
Well, I appreciate your time, and we love telling these stories. This is one of my favorites. And again, we were going to conclude our visit with, certainly there is Google now and there is ChatGPT, and we only have a certain amount of time to tell a certain amount of Martin's story, but there's so much more out there, and we encourage you to Google and ChatGPT, Martin Gomez, Harlandale High School class of 1982.
Yeah, go into my Insta. I'm
Thank
pretty
you.
active.
Thank you,
Such
Martin.
a pleasure, Robert.
Oh,
Such
the pleasure is mine.
Such
the
a
pleasure
pleasure.
is mine. Robert Villafranca on the Warpath Podcast. Thank you for joining us.